Andrea, when you didn't at that stage, or did you know at what stage Nancy's Alzheimer's had reached? I mean, what's very interesting in the book is how you describe the different stages. And what stage, do you want to just explain those stages and how, where you were when you moved in and where they were?
Thank you, I think I will. Yes, I said to you that she'd lost her sequential steps. And that was in Edinburgh at the retirement flat that they'd lived in for 10 years perfectly happily. And so she had long-term memory at that place. And it would have been far better for Nancy to have stayed there. Because the thing people never understand is just about losing your memory. That's not the worst thing. The thing that happens is that you can no longer make memory. So when we had some residual mapping, despite losing a lot of her memory, into a new house where she didn't have any idea where she was or what was going on, made everything 100 times worse. And so there was a steep decline. We had one golden summer in which the peninsula, which was incredibly beautiful, there was views of islands and cliffs and beaches, and there were whales and seals and puffins, and we had 3 beaches around the house. We were out on the promontory, and it was stunningly beautiful. We had one beautiful summer, and the bed and breakfast was going really well. And then things began to deteriorate really sharply because Nancy realised that she was not on holiday and began to ask when she could go home. And when I say she began to ask when she could go home, she asked me 45 times a day when she could go home, and began to pack and to make off down the drive with her teeth in her hanky and her handbag and her favourite pair of shoes in her hand, off, and had to be rescued. So that became quite difficult. We had to lock the doors, which is really difficult with 3 children in the summer. And then, really the next step was in the October, so it was about 2 months after we arrived, when Morris, her husband, broke his leg and went to hospital and was away for 5 months. He had to go to Aberdeen. At that point, I think, even though she didn't really know any longer who Morris was, it was Morris who anchored her life. And when he'd gone, she was completely at sea. And I always say this in interviews, but I can't even now imagine what it must be like to be asleep in a bedroom and to wake up and to not recognise it. And to have someone come into the room and say to you, "Hello Nancy, how are you today?" And you have no idea who they are. And to give you clothes that you've never seen before, and to take you to a chair and say it's yours. And all of this is new to you. And for that to happen to you every single day must be incredibly frightening. And so Nancy did become afraid. And out of fear, hostility springs. She became quite aggressive with the children, and at that point things became very difficult. In terms of her mental state, it was fascinating and also, in a way, a bit grisly. And I accused myself of voyeurism because it was so interesting. Just watching how the disease colonised her brain and seeing the changes that brought. The day where she could no longer match a word in an object, for instance. It had just happened one morning. The day before, it was fine. She knew what a shoe was and a foot and how they related to each other. The next day, we went shopping to the local shop. She stole some biscuits, which was one of her great joys in life at this point. We went back to the house and she said, "Can I help you put the shopping away?" I said, "That would be great, thank you, Nancy." I said, "Can you pass me the milk?" And she said, "Oh, what is it?" And I said, "It's the milk, it's the white carton in the bag." And the bag was sitting on the kitchen table with a carton of cardboard white carton milk in it. I said, "It's the white carton." She said, "What's white?" I said, it's the thing right there, look, and I put my hand on it. I said, "The carton of milk, can you pass it to me?" And she picked up the newspaper and handed it to me. And at that point, things had really deteriorated. And it was very difficult to know how to make her happy. It had been all right up till then because I could always find a way of making her happy. She loved hoovering, for instance. She'd do a lot of that, polishing furniture, things from her deep past when she was a housewife. Gardening, growing things. But at this point, not being able to relate to objects at all, and having no idea who we all were, things became almost impossible.
How did your children cope?
They didn't really. At first it was fine, because they'd say, they were very solicitous of her needs. They'd say, Granny, can I help you do that? And she would let them. And then there came a point where she wouldn't let them and would accuse them of things and would come to me and say, I have to tell you, I'm pig sick of all these young people that live here. And then it got to the calling my 9-year-old a bastard. That wasn't fun. Hitting him was really the end of the story. But they were amazingly robust. And Jack, who was the 9-year-old, for instance, would deal with it really well. His friends would come around to play. They'd run into the hallway, and Nancy would be there doing her patrolling, because she patrolled the house all day, making a rutt in the carpet. And they'd have an encounter with her, which was a little strange for the friends. And Jack would say, it's all right, boys, Granny's gone over to the dark side. And they shrug their shoulders and off they go. So he dealt with it fine. But I think now, looking back, I think he did them a lot of good. Because they're now incredibly sympathetic to the elderly and understand mortality. And they have an understanding of how physical a thing a personality is. Which is something that really interests me, is that Alzheimer's is a disease of identity. Is that what you lose yourself. You literally do.
What did that make you think about the self? I mean, when you talk about that a lot in the book.
I do. It's a real preoccupation. Well, this was the learning curve for me, because I'd always cherished the idea that a self is something that's safe from our biological selves, in a way, thinking of a self as a soul, and that there was something that was me that would always be me. But that's not true. It just isn't. And how there can be a soul, I have no idea. And if we have a soul, it must be something that's hidden from our consciousness. It must be something hidden away safe from that. In other words, it's not something we know, therefore it's not us. I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but if you read the book, it's put in far better English than that. The fact is that a self, like a memory, is a biological thing. A self is something that's almost an orchestral performance created by millions of neurons in the brain working together in concert to create a performance. And once Alzheimer's, which is a form of brain damage, it's not a mental illness as it's so often misnamed, creates a sort of forest fire through the brain and damages all little different areas of it, almost randomly, although it always takes the same form, oddly, the same route. Once that happens, that orchestral music cannot be made, and new music starts to be made. Nancy became literally a different person. I saw it happen in front of my eyes, and it got to the point where her consciousness of herself was so eroded that she began to talk to herself in the mirror as if that was someone else. Just before she went to the care home, she had a week of chatting to her new friend. At that point, she wasn't talking to me. This is really what brought things to a head. It's because I found as a carer I needed to be appreciated. And I know this about myself. I needed her to be grateful to my sacrifice, because I wasn't doing anything other than looking after her, really, at the end. And it was a 24 hours, 7 days job. Children were bringing themselves up, basically, and everyone else was looking after themselves. So at the point at which Nancy no longer spoke to me and called me the bitch, that was my name, she began to make new friendships, and one of them was with the lady in the mirror who she would invite in for tea. And she would stand back, I saw her do it a few times, stand back in the hallway and say, won't you come in? I'd love it if you'd come in. And I'd come behind her and say, Nancy, who are you talking to? This is my new friend. I'm asking her in, but she won't come. She doesn't like you. So that was that. And that was really at the point at which we realised that Nancy was so unhappy that the best thing for her would be not to be in a family. This is a great preoccupation of mine.